I'm coming in hot.
Good day, everyone. I trust that you are doing very well today. This is NKay, Nana Kwabena. It's quite unfortunate that Sir Godson is not around, so I would have to take up the initiative and make this tutorial. All right. So this is CENG in 7 days, brought to you by NKay Study, and this is day 6. Let's quickly go through the agenda for today. Then we'll go into the outline, then straight into the tutorials. So for day 6, we are supposed to treat about 3 things. We have conclusions, right? When we get to the outline, I'll let you understand that it's not just the conclusion, but then there is something else attached to it. We have recommendations. We have appendices, right? Or appendix. Appendices is just a plural form of appendix. So let's go into the tutorial outline. So for the first section, we'll be dealing with conclusions and recommendations. Recommendations are what we call further suggestions or suggestions for further work, right? Then the second order, we'll be talking about references and plagiarism. And then we are going to climax with the appendices. So let's go straight into the tutorial. Conclusion and recommendations. Now, I believe by this time you've already done your abstracts, you have your acknowledgement, you have your project background, introduction, aims and objectives, problem statement, and everything. We have the overview of methodology. We have the methodology itself, right? That one talks about how you got to identify the problem. It talks about the methods and the materials that you used, right? The research methods, whether qualitative or quantitative, whether you use a questionnaire or whatnot, right? So you've actually gone through the actual content of the work. You've described the problem, you've described your program of study. You've also made us to understand how exactly you're going to link that problem with your program of study and to solve the problem, right? So we are now coming to the ending of the report, right? Every report has a climax, and the climax is the conclusion and the recommendations. Actually, the conclusions, right? The recommendations actually tells us what you want to do beyond the work that you've done as at the moment of completion, right? So let's go straight into it. So the conclusion, what does it actually entails, right? It's the final piece of writing in your report. Is the final piece of writing in any research paper, in any research focus, in any study that you do, right? It actually summarizes everything that you've done in a very simple paragraph, in some simple sentences. Unlike the abstract, this one actually states the key findings from your study. So you'd realize that in the abstract, what we actually looking for is what you are about to do. We are trying to understand what the work is going to entail, right? That is what the abstract is all about, sorry. But then for the conclusion, it outlines the findings that you actually got from the project, the findings that you got from the research focus, right? I'll explain further with some case studies for you to understand. So let's get to the last point for the conclusion. It says it addresses the objectives that you set out to achieve, right? That is what differentiates it from the abstract. The abstract goes straight to the point in the sense that it talks about the introduction a little, it talks about the methods and the materials that you use, and then it talks about the findings in a very simple manner, right? For the conclusion, it deals directly with the findings, just the findings, right? It deals directly with what you set out to achieve, right? And what you set out to achieve is what you actually got in the findings, basically, right? So if before your project, your objective or your aim or your target was to find an alternative source to alternative power source to automobiles, right? Maybe aside the internal combustion engine, you want it to run on a different power system, right? Power generation system, probably electric vehicles or the hybrid systems, right? So if that was the objective that you set out to achieve, in the conclusion, you want to understand whether you have been able to achieve that particular goal or not. That is what the conclusion is there to do, right? So let's understand how exactly you are going to write your conclusion. It's in three parts, right? I have summarized it, or I have broken it down into three different parts for you to understand how exactly you are going to write it. Okay. So the first part is what I call the restating or the revisiting. So in the first part of the conclusion, you are just going to reiterate, right? You're going to restate or revisit your thesis, or for our case, let me see, your research topic or the problem statement. You're going to revisit again, right? You go back to it, you refer back to it, and then you're going to affirm that it is actually a developmental challenge, right? So let me give a hypothetical situation or a classical example. So in my project last year, right, or mine was to the research topic was frequent power outages in the new site of Kote Diako, right? So if I want to conclude my report, I would have to revisit that particular topic or problem statement and make the reader understand that after going through the number of stages, after going through a number of methods of research, after going through a number of qualitative and quantitative research methods, I've actually affirmed that this is what the community is facing, right? Now, it continues to say the conclusion's primary role. Let me annotate for you to get to work, right? The conclusion's primary role is to convince the reader that your argument is valid, right? So initially you made a thesis, you made a hypothesis, right? You made a statement that there are frequent power outages in Kote Didiako, right? So you are now coming to conclude after having the objectives. Part of the objectives, I'll get there right now, was to identify the causes of power outages and also look out for some repercussions here and there, right? So after the project, you came to understand that there is actually power outages in Kote Didiako, right? So you're now coming to tell us what exactly you're coming to affirm, right? So this is a point where you affirm or you validate your research topic, your thesis, or your problem statement, right? After doing this, then it leads you to the actual findings of the study, where we'll be talking about the objectives of the study, right? So the second part of the conclusion is talking about the main points and highlights from the research. So this is where you address the objective that you set earlier in the introductory chapter. So in the introduction, right, or the introductory chapter, you were having the aim and the objectives, right? And then I'll be using my paper, or let me say my research, as the use case over here, the case study, for you to get it very well. So you let me just mention the point, and then when we get there, you understand it very well. The last part says that's the significance or the relevance of the project, right? Yes, you are supposed to have a personal connection with the person that is reading your report, and you are supposed to write the relevance and the implications of your studies and findings. So, frequent power outages, what's the relevance? How is it going to help the reader? How is it going to help anyone in Kote Didiako, right? So let's look at this case study. So in this case study, we have A, we have B. The A is talking about the aim and the objectives of my research, and then the B is talking about the conclusion, right? So the aim over here was to ensure that we have a continuous and uninterrupted power supply to the community of study, right? And I listed a number of objectives that I want to see. Now, let me just make a simple difference between the aim and the objective, right? The aim is what you actually want to get or gain at the end of the whole project. The objectives are the individual points or the individual happenings or events that are going to make you um, get to that aim. Or when those objectives are set, then it means that you've actually gotten the aim, right? So if you know the causes of a problem, if you know the effects of that problem, then you will now be able to understand the need to curb it. So having the need to curb it is what will actually push you to propose solutions to those problems. And then after that, you are going to tell the people how exactly they are going to embrace those solutions, right? So if you're able to go through these 4 steps, then you can be able to achieve your aim that you wanted. That is the difference between an aim and objective. That is not what this is about, but then I just had to chip it in. So over here, the conclusion, we made the opening statement, right? We had the revisiting or the revisiting. Let me just make it simple. And then it says power outages is indeed a setback in the news cycle of Cote d'Ivoire caused by several natural, technical, and even human factors. So I mean, in this opening sentence, right, I've gone back to the research focus or the problem statement, but then I've mentioned it in a different language. I've mentioned it in different words. So you're supposed to do it like that. You're not supposed to just quote it word for word or verbatim, right? You are just supposed to trace it back and let us affirm for us, right? Validate that what you were talking about, you've actually come to a conclusion that yes, it was not just a guess, it was not just a hypothesis, right? But then it's actually happening in the community. So I said indeed. So when you use the word indeed, I mean, using the word indeed means that it's actually a validation. It's an affirmation. You are agreeing to the fact that what you mentioned before, you've verified that it's actually true, right? Then it comes to the summary, where it's linking the objectives to the findings, right? So the objectives were to know the causes, and over here I mentioned that there were some natural, technical, and even human factors. Those are the causes. You need not to necessarily mention all the causes. You could mention one or two, right? That's also not bad. Then we come to some of the inconveniences, right? Even the factors, I actually laid some of them out. I said some equipment failure. We have natural disasters, sorry, poor governance, high energy, and whatnot. Then I talked about the inconveniences, that is a halt in industrial work, shortage of water, inability to cook, and whatnot. And then we proposing solutions to it. I also made mention of that. So 4 different mechanical engineering based solutions have been proposed to solve the issue of blackout in the society. So having made this is the closing statement, right? To solve the issue, I actually combined the summary and the closing statement, right? So we've been able to solve the issue of blackout. So you are done with the conclusion. It's very, very simple. You have an opening statement, you have the summary, then you have the concluding remarks. Let's quickly talk about recommendations and then we will move on to the next one. So the recommendation is normally part of the concluding chapter, right? So if the concluding chapter is chapter 5, we can say the conclusion is 5.1 and the recommendations is 5.2, right? The recommendation is nothing but um, suggestions for further work, right? So you can simply put that, is there anything that I want to do after what I've done today or after what I've done in this project? That is what the recommendations is all about, right? What should be the follow up to your work or research? So you see, many a times when people write books, they have first edition, second edition, and whatnot, right? So after writing the first edition, when they go through, a researcher or a publication might make some recommendations that they should add these things, take some things out. And after doing those things, they will publish the second copy or the second issue and they'll name that as second edition or whatever edition, right? That is what the recommendation is supposed to do. Probably you are supposed to complete the work in a period of 1 month or 2 months, but then you are not able to do everything right? So you can just say that I was able to do up to this point, but then more work can be done after this point. That is what the recommendations is there for, right? The recommendations cover suggestions to improve your work, like I said about those that write books, to improve upon the books that they've written, and then tell the reader what can be changed in the future based on your findings. I would go through my reports recommendations for you to look at some things as well. So over here, I began with a preamble and I said, as a result of what has been learned during this project, the following lines of research seem particularly promising, right? Great. And then I began to list them. Now, more often than not, if you have more than one recommendations, we have to um, make them in a bullet form. I don't know if I wrote it down. Um, all right, so it seems it's not part of the slides, right? So I was talking about the conclusion and then the recommendation being in one chapter. So this is another case study where we have chapter 5, we have the conclusion, and then we have the recommendation, right? So let's look at this recommendation. It says that the team would have liked to make changes to the final concept. The final concept has some flaws according to the basic matrix system of evaluation, but since time did not permit, no changes were made. The team wanted the product to be easier to service so that the customers would love it more, right? So if there are more things that you'd want to add to your work, you make us understand and know those things that the recommendations, right? Thank you. Let's go to the references. Now, before we continue, I'm just going to just mention what the reference is all about, but then we are going to make a video to show you how to make citations and references, a separate video, right? You are supposed to add this to this. It's going to be a very long one indeed. So let's just understand what references are, then you can just continue from there. So it's just serves as a guide to any reader who wants to refer to previous work on the subject, right? So when I was working on frequent power outages, I just wanted to refer to the reader that there has been other works on the topic that I am treating. Many a times you have the review at the background of study, the research gap, or the literature review. We've already mentioned these things before, so I wouldn't want to continue. I think that was on the second day, I believe. Yes, it also shows appreciation for the work of other researchers, right? You are trying to appreciate what other people have done, right? It is actually amazing to show gratitude to people when they have original works. If you fail to credit those people, there are some sanctions, there are some repercussions, right? We have it means that you as an individual, you are careless. You just do anything without having some checks and balances. You just do anything out of the blue, and that is not the kind of engineers that we want to raise in this generation, right? And the last thing is plagiarism. You've heard these things. Um, I know you've heard this word before, right? But then what does it actually mean? Because if you are supposed to involve yourself in plagiarism, it's going to affect you in so many ways as a student, right? So let's understand what plagiarism is. You get to know some definitions from Wikipedia, from Stanford University, and then from Princeton University, right? They are all summing up to the same thing. So I'm not going to read everything, right? So let me just use Princeton's definition. Princeton says that is the deliberate use of someone else's language, ideas, or other original material without acknowledging its source, right? Let me read the one from Wikipedia as well. Wikipedia says fraudulent fraudulent representation of another person's language, thoughts, ideas, or expressions as your own original work. And then Stanford says that, and then Stanford also says that the use without giving reasonable and appropriate credit to or acknowledging the author or source of another person's original work, whether such work is made up of code, formulas, ideas, language, research, strategies, writing, or any other form. So basically, anything that you are going to copy that is not from your own, that is not your own intellectual property, it can be termed as plagiarism, right? So if you are going to look on my work to copy some things and you don't reference, you don't make a reference, you don't cite my project, right? That is plagiarism. If you are going to use someone that completed 2010 or 2013, it's still plagiarism, right? So we are encouraging you not to copy someone's work. That is it. That is what they are trying to say. There are different forms of plagiarism, but I'm not going to treat it in this video. We have deliberate, we have direct, we have a whole lot of um, forms of plagiarism, right? But then the basic understanding is that don't copy someone else's work, even if it's your own work that you did 5 years ago in a different course or probably in senior high school. You are still supposed to cite it, right? That is also one form of plagiarism because it was directed to a different professor or a different lecturer or a different school. If you did a similar project work and it was in senior high school, it is not something that you are doing as a university student. So you have to actually cite or refer back to the source, right? That is what it's all about. And here are some of the repercussions of plagiarism, right? We have scoring of lower grade. Yeah, they are going to reduce the grade that you're supposed to get. So if actually the work that you did was supposed to score you 70 out of 100, but then they realized that you looked on someone else's work, they can give you something like 20 over the 100, right? It can also result in automatic throw or fail of the course, and that is what they mostly do in CNG, right? Either they make you get a lower grade or they actually fail you in the course for you to take it again. This time you take it serious and you do it yourself without copying someone's work, right? Then we have suspension. In extreme cases, they can even suspend you from the school and tell you not to come to school for a specific number of weeks or number of months. Probably it could even be a year. So you'd have to try your best to not involve yourself in this act. Expulsion in very extreme cases, mild cases, they can even eradicate you from the school. You can be expelled from the school, right? And then we have legal repercussions too. Sometimes if your work that you are going to copy has been copyrighted and you go and use it without citing it, right? And the copyright owner or the original author sees the work, they can sue you, they can take you to court. So this is a very serious issue, right? Plagiarism in schools, the consequences. This is also a case study. And then, like I said before, we are not really going to involve ourselves in how exactly to be referencing and citing. This is just to let you understand what references is all about, right? So in the other video, I'll explain to you how I got all these things, right? But these things are trying to let you understand that I retrieved a certain information from this particular website. I retrieved this from this website. I retrieved some information from a book called the CRC Handbook of Mechanical Engineering. And then this is Zacharias. I've mentioned Zacharias before in the first video, day one of CENG, right? Yeah, this was from Zacharias' report from 2019. So if you are going to use NKay's report or Segorson's report, you still have to cite or make a reference to that. Great. appendices. That's all. This will just take us probably some 2-3 minutes. All right. So, is any additional material that helped you in your study, in your research, or your project, right? So, when you got to the chapter 3, that is the methodology. If I'm not wrong, that's chapter 3, right? You were supposed to tell us the methods, the research methods that you used to come out with your project, right? The materials and the methods that you use to get your findings. You are supposed to tell us all those things. So we talked about questionnaires, we talked about interview questions. There are people that also made phone calls and whatnot, right? So you've provided some of those materials already. You're supposed to take a picture of your community and other things, right? So any other material aside the ones that you've already provided, but then they still helped you in your report, right? We call them external materials or additional materials. These things are supposed to be seen in the appendix or the appendices, right? Great. So I added some things to it, that the appendix may also contain recordings or transcripts or minutes of meetings and interviews that were relevant to the study. Let me just explain this to you. Let's say you had a phone call with a personnel from ECG, or you had an interview with someone from Ghana Highway Authority, right? And you want to actually have um, a written recording of whatever transpired between you and the resource personnel, right? You can also do that and place that at the appendix. It makes us understand what exactly or how exactly you got some of the information in your research, right? So if the one from ECG tells you some technical stuff, right? When you record it, it also helps us to understand how exactly you got some information. Like I said, so we have recordings, we have transcripts, minutes of meetings. If probably you had a meeting with some particular people or group of people, if it was a group work, I think those are materials and metallurgy, sorry, sometimes they group you into, they put you into groups to do the work, right? So if that was the case and you had a group meeting, whether online or in person, you could also provide minutes of those meetings, right? Great. So for the purpose of CENG, there are two main things that should be in the appendix. The rest are optional, right? But I would suggest that you add them anyway if you actually have them. So you have the letter of introduction, we've actually explained already. It is just a document that gives you it gives you the authority, or didn't say authority, but it gives you the privilege, right, to go to a notable or recognized institution to ask them questions that are going to be relevant to your research focus. We have the questionnaire or the interview question that you use. If there are any additional maps that helped you aside the map of your community, you can add that to it. Any additional pictures, you add that to it. Like I said, minutes of meetings, and then recordings or transcripts of interviews and phone calls. We are about done. So this is the case study for the appendix, right? So this is a copy of my questionnaire. You are supposed to add that as part of the report. So that's the last thing that you write as part of the report, the appendices, right? So I have appendix A, and that was the copy of my questionnaire, and I have appendix C, that is a letter of introduction, right? The questionnaire had about 4 parts. I couldn't cut everything over here, right? So this is about it. Like I said, we are going to make a separate video for the site, the reference, and if possible, to be in the description box as soon as possible. Thank you once again. Thank you for your unwavering attention. This is NKay study and CENG in 7 days.